Welcome back to GMF Talk. I'm Sertan Sanderson, and I'm excited to welcome Elif Shafak, one of the best-selling authors of our time, with me today. Now, we've been talking about issues relating to populism, to women's rights, to politics, even to this very interesting age we're all in with the coronavirus. But today, Elif Shafak and I want to discuss something very personal: mental health. Mental health is an issue that does reflect time and again in your writing, in your work, in your activism, and many people would maybe regard you as a disruptor of sorts in this context. First of all, you address issues in your work that some societies do not feel at ease with, be that sexuality, patriarchy, religion, or even more specific and more personal, issues such as postpartum depression. But also you use literature as your means of expression, as your way of communicating and transporting your observations into the world. Now, is there something different to this approach, ultimately, than, say, what I do, which is using journalism?
First of all, I have a lot of respect for journalism, investigative journalism. I think we're living at a time when journalism and media freedoms are very much under attack across the world. That said, I am a storyteller, I'm a fiction writer, and as you pointed out, my path is different. And I think what stories try to do, what literature tries to do, is to rehumanize people who have been dehumanized, at least the way I see it. You know, I'm of course interested in stories, but I'm equally interested in silences. People who have been silenced, people whose voices we never hear. So that's a big part of my work, and that is an emotional attachment. Sometimes I hear readers say, it's usually male readers who say this, to be honest. They say, you know, I read politics, I read history, philosophy, finance, economy, because I try to understand what's happening in the world. So much is happening. My wife reads fiction. I don't have time for fiction. And when I hear this, I feel sad, because inside fiction, there's everything. Inside fiction, there is politics, there is psychology, there is history, there is philosophy, and so much more. But most importantly, there's emotional intelligence, and there's empathy. I don't know a single human being who doesn't need empathy. Whether we're an engineer, or a teacher, or a scientist, or a student, or a baker, or a designer, we all need emotional intelligence. So that's what the art of storytelling does. But as a result, I am constantly digging into emotions. Some of them can be negative emotions on the surface, such as anxiety, such as depression. I'm not unfamiliar to these feelings. And I think it's healthier for us to be able to openly talk about them rather than try to sweep them under the carpet in the name of seeming strong. Because we associate emotions with weakness. But that is a wrong equation. To be emotional is not a sign of weakness. It's a very human thing. I'd rather understand, celebrate emotions, and try to turn them into something more positive and more constructive, both for individuals, but also for the communities and societies we live in.
You've, I think, already answered the next question I was going to ask you, which is why mental health and emotions play such an important part in your books, in your work, and in your life. But what aspect of your own mental health do you feel comfortable sharing in your works? And where would you draw a line where you feel like your personal being should not be interfered with, where you would not overshare, perhaps?
Yes, there is a thin line, but I think it's very important for women to share their stories, not only for women, but for each and every one of us, because two things happen when you are going through a depression. You think it's only happening to you, and you think it's forever. But when you hear that someone else who might be maybe successful on the surface or very happy on the surface, but if that person tells you their story and says, you know, I too suffer from moments of anxiety, from moments of melancholy, or even more. When you hear someone else's story, then you realize, first of all, you are not alone. This is incredibly important to understand that we're not alone. And secondly, we realize it doesn't go on forever. It is a season, and after that season, there are other seasons in our lives. So it is very important for us to openly talk about mental health, to openly talk about emotional turbulence, and you can do that without bringing your very private life into the public space. It is possible. There is a balance there. But I think silences are dangerous. And again, if we have learned anything at all from Black Lives Matter, from Me Too movement, and from very important social movements for change and equality in the last decade especially, we have learned one thing, that silence encourages, emboldens inequality. So we have to share our stories, but most importantly, we have to listen to other people's stories.
And you put that so poetically. Thank you. Let's move slightly, perhaps, to a more positive outlook. Last year, you published a book called How to Stay Sane in an Age of Division. In a nutshell, could you please share with us how we do manage to stay sane in these rather interesting times?
I think we approach the question by recognizing that it's okay not to be okay at a moment like this. So rather than trying to be always jolly and happy and, completely balanced, trying to be perfect all the time, we have to recognize the fact and embrace the fact that it's okay. If you're feeling from time to time anxious, if you're feeling angry, if you're feeling frustrated, disappointed, it means that you are following what's happening in the world. If you're not feeling any of these things, then it means you're living in your own cocoon. So my point is, when we follow, when we feel what's happening in the world, of course it has an emotional toll. That is understandable, and that's not a bad thing. But the thing is, anger in the long run can be quite corrosive, or anxiety in the long run can be quite damaging. So to recognize these emotions, but how do we turn them into something positive? In order to do that, I think we have to make a distinction between information, knowledge, and wisdom. We're living in a world in which we have way too much information. And the truth is, we cannot process this much information. We have too much information, less knowledge, and very little wisdom in today's world. We have to change that ratio. Let's have less information, please, because we're not processing it. Let's have more knowledge, which means we need books, investigative journalism. We need in-depth analysis. We need to slow down. And ultimately, we need wisdom. And for that, I think we need to bring the mind and the heart, intelligence and emotions together.
That does sound wonderful at face value, but we are being surrounded by machines left, right, and center. There are self-driving cars, there are robots, there's personal assistants that tell you what the weather is like and whether you need to wear a jacket outside. How do we increase wisdom and insight when we are surrounded by machines that just churn out information all the time?
So what information does, and you will remember there was a time when information was, there was so much optimism about information. This was hailed as the age of information. There were techno-optimists telling us, thanks to digital technologies, the whole world was going to become a democracy. When there were uprisings in Iran, it was hailed, it was called Twitter rebellion. When the Arab Spring started, there was so much optimism that a young Egyptian couple named their newborn baby daughter Facebook. And I never forget, 6 months later, a family in Israel, they named their third child Like. So fast forward, I think about those children a lot today. Facebook in Egypt and Like in Israel. They were born into a time of digital optimism, optimism about information, and now fast forward, we're in the age of anxiety. We need to talk about the dark side of digital technologies. It has a bright side, but also a very dark side in terms of misinformation, hate speech, slander, dividing us into boxes. We need to spend less time getting our information from social media. We need to go back to books, slow down. I think we each need an inner garden, to retreat into that inner garden for as long as we can every day and balance ourselves. Because when we're surrounded by other people, we are affected by their energy. If all my friends are biased against a certain identity, whether it's a sexual identity, ethnic identity, or cultural identity, that bias also starts to affect me. We don't realize this. So when we go to an inner garden with a book in our hand, something else opens up in our psyche. But ultimately, I think we need wisdom. And for that, we need stories. We need storytelling. I'm not saying that as writers we are wise, don't get me wrong. But the art of literature, art itself, has more room, space for wisdom, precisely because it helps us to connect with our fellow human beings in ways we never can in our daily lives. We connect through the mind, but also through the heart, if we know someone else's story. That's why I think we need to spend less time on social media dealing with bombardment of information, more time with books, thinking, a walk in nature, just reconnecting. As we are speaking, our planet is burning. We have a massive climate crisis unfolding in front of our eyes. This is the moment when we reconnect with Earth. So there's a lot of rethinking and reckoning that we need to do right now.
Thank you. Thank you for those words. And again, for putting everything so beautifully as only an author can. I think we're all going to retreat into our inner gardens until the next episode, when we're going to welcome Elif Shafak to talk about writing and publishing and the book industry in general. Thank you very much.